The wail of sirens slices through the calm of a quiet suburban evening. Red and blue lights dance across pristine lawns and neatly trimmed hedges. Over the police radio, a frantic 911 call comes alive through bursts of static. Please, hurry. Something terrible has happened. My husband. He isn't breathing. For 2 decades, Sarah Mitchell believed she had stumbled into a dream marriage. A doting husband who poured her coffee each morning, a comfortable home in Orlando's suburbs, and a relationship that neighbors envied as the very definition of love. But what she uncovered in their bedroom on a sweltering August night wasn't simply betrayal. It was a revelation so devastating, so humiliating, that it shattered her sense of self. Tonight, we peel back the layers of a marriage built on deception, one that unraveled in the most violent way imaginable. A man left lifeless on the bedroom floor, while his wife of 20 years stood over him, trembling, her hands wet with tears and blood. This isn't only a murder story. It's about the crushing weight of a lie so deep that when it surfaced, it annihilated everything in its path. How does someone maintain such an elaborate illusion for 20 years? What kind of secret could carry a price so steep? And when Sarah finally unearthed the truth about the man she thought she knew better than anyone, why did she answer with violence instead of simply walking away? The sirens fade. The crime scene tape rises, and in the shadows, the truth begins to show itself. Let's rewind to where everything began. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a 52-year-old insurance adjuster who believed she understood every corner of her husband's soul. She was the woman who organized block parties, never forgot a birthday, and clung to the belief that love conquered everything. To those around her, Sarah symbolized devotion and trust. And then there was Robert Mitchell, 55, a smooth-talking sales manager who spent weekends coaching Little League and volunteering at the food pantry. Friends called him Rob. Other husbands envied him. He was attentive, affectionate, the kind of man who seemed to put his wife first at every turn. Or so it appeared. But facades are often the deadliest lies. What was Robert Mitchell hiding behind his perfect husband mask? How could Sarah remain blind for 2 decades? And what kind of revelation doesn't just fracture a marriage, but leaves one partner dead and the other staring at life in prison? Welcome to Silent Witness, Echoes of Crime. Thank you to all of you watching and subscribing. Stay tuned for daily crime breakdowns. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and grab your free ebook at the link in the pinned comment. A love story born in glitter, Sarah and Robert's romance bloomed like something straight from a holiday film. December 1999, at a company Christmas party, Sarah was a young claims adjuster, Robert was in pharmaceutical sales. She later confessed to friends that the moment he asked her to dance, she felt her breath catch. Confident but not cocky, funny without overdoing it, and with a presence that made her feel like the only woman in the room, Robert swept her away. Their courtship was a storm of affection and surprises. He sent flowers to her office unannounced. He whisked her off on weekend trips planned down to the smallest detail. He wrote heartfelt letters, now yellowing in a shoebox under their bed. On New Year's Eve 2000, before he could even finish the proposal, Sarah blurted yes. 6 months later, they married in a picturesque church ceremony, with friends and relatives marveling at how flawless they seemed. The first years felt like paradise. They bought a starter home in a quiet Orlando suburb, wandered farmers' markets, browsed art fairs, and spoke endlessly of the children they'd one day raise. Robert doted on Sarah in ways that made her friends envious, phoning at lunch just to hear her voice, slipping notes into her bag, and always involving her in decisions big or small. But beneath that polished image, hairline fractures began to appear. Cracks in the facade. Robert was guarded about his past, brushing off questions about childhood with vague references to painful memories. He had no close male friends, grew uneasy in large crowds, and their intimacy, once fiery, began dwindling after the first year. Every time Sarah brought up children, he delayed, "Let's wait a little longer." As the years trickled by, Sarah chalked it all up to the natural settling of a long marriage. The passionate embraces softened into pecks. Conversations once about dreams became focused on chores and schedules. When Sarah proposed counseling, Robert reassured her, "Every marriage goes through seasons. Let's just be patient." Sarah doubled down on being the ideal wife. She kept their home spotless, mastered his favorite recipes, and supported his career ambitions without hesitation. When he claimed more travel was necessary, she believed him. When he asked for space, she granted it. When intimacy virtually disappeared, she blamed herself. To the outside world, the Mitchells looked like the picture of marital bliss, a couple holding hands on neighborhood strolls, a husband who never missed an anniversary, a wife who praised her spouse with glowing sincerity. At neighborhood barbecues, women whispered about how lucky Sarah was. But no one saw the reality behind 1247 Maple Street's closed doors. By their 15th anniversary, Sarah's entire identity revolved around being Robert's wife. She'd passed on promotions to prioritize his career, maintained few friendships outside their couple circle, and accepted their childless marriage as God's plan. She convinced herself their life, though imperfect, was a blessing compared to broken marriages around her. But contentment built on falsehoods is fragile, like a card tower waiting for a breath to send it tumbling. After 20 years, that foundation was about to collapse in the cruelest way possible. The night it fell apart, August 15, 2019. Just another Thursday. Sarah kissed Robert goodbye, thinking he was off for another day of sales calls. She had no inkling that before midnight police would photograph his lifeless body while reading her Miranda rights. It began with something small, a forgotten phone charger. Sarah slipped home during her lunch break. From the hallway, she heard sounds coming from their bedroom. At first, she assumed Robert had come home sick. But then came a voice, his voice soft, tender, filled with desire. Words she had never once heard directed at her. Her blood iced over. She pressed herself against the door, listening to her husband pour out passion to someone else. Not just an affair, but intimacy of a kind he denied her for 2 decades. Hands trembling, Sarah pushed the door open. There sat Robert, partly undressed, engaged in an explicit video call. He froze when he saw her. For an instant, 20 years of lies filled the room like poison gas. He fumbled excuses, but Sarah heard none of it. All she could feel was 2 decades of rejection, humiliation, and emptiness crashing down. She whispered, "How long?" His silence told her everything. When she stumbled on a hidden drawer filled with photos, letters, and proof of his double life, the pain turned combustible. She hurled the contents at him, screaming about the 20 years he'd stolen. He tried restraining her, urging her to calm down. But reason was gone. The man she had loved was a stranger who had worn her husband's face for 2 decades. In blind rage, Sarah seized a heavy crystal award, one of Robert's sales trophies. As he turned, still minimizing, still excusing, she brought it down with all her fury. The crack of crystal on skull echoed through their house. Robert collapsed, blood pooling onto the carpet they'd chosen together years before. Sarah stood, trophy still clenched, realizing that in destroying the man who destroyed her, she had destroyed herself. The aftermath: by the time police arrived, Robert was dead, and Sarah sat calmly in the living room, nightgown stained, eyes hollow. At 11:47 p.m., her voice on the 911 tape was disturbingly steady. "I think I've killed my husband. Send someone to 1247 Maple Street." Detective Maria Santos arrived to a scene unlike most. No attempt to flee, no alibi, no cover-up. In the bedroom, blood evidence and the crystal trophy told the story. An overturned drawer spilled secrets, letters, documents, artifacts of Robert's hidden life. This wasn't spontaneous madness. It was the eruption of 20 years of deceit. The investigation, the Mitchell home quickly transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the tidy suburban property, its cheerful garden gnomes now standing guard over tragedy. Detectives combed through every corner, photographing blood stains, collecting fingerprints, bagging the shattered trophies still slick with crimson. Neighbors clustered on sidewalks, whispering in disbelief. "Not Sarah and Rob," they murmured. The Mitchells had been the neighborhood's golden couple. Cookouts, holiday lights, cheerful waves from the driveway. No one could reconcile that image with the body being wheeled into a van. Inside, Sarah remained disturbingly composed. She sat at the kitchen table, wrists cuffed, eyes red but dry. When Detective Santos asked if she wanted a lawyer, she shook her head. "No. I just want to explain." And explain she did. Over hours of interviews, Sarah poured out the story of 2 decades of denial, rejection, and secrecy. She spoke of loneliness so sharp it felt physical, of excuses that wore her down to a shadow, of the discovery that her entire marriage had been a façade. "He stole 20 years of my life," she whispered, staring at the table. "And when I finally saw the truth, I snapped." Investigators documented the evidence of Robert's hidden life: explicit video calls, messages to men across the country, photos hidden in a locked drawer. Forensic analysis confirmed he had cultivated relationships for years under Sarah's nose. The story was clear: Robert Mitchell had built a marriage on lies, and Sarah had destroyed him when the truth surfaced. But the law doesn't weigh betrayal and broken trust against blood on the carpet. The state of Florida had only one question: was this premeditated murder or a crime of passion? The trial, Sarah Mitchell's trial, began in the spring of 2021, drawing crowds and headlines. The prosecution painted her as a woman who couldn't accept rejection. They argued she had choices: divorce, separation, walking away, but instead chose violence. This was not justice, the prosecutor declared. It was vengeance. Epulated and denied intimacy, whose mental state finally crumbled under the weight of betrayal. They described her as the victim of psychological abuse, someone whose entire reality had been built on deception. Sarah Mitchell did not wake up that morning planning to kill her husband, her attorney told the jury. She broke, because her entire life was a lie. Witnesses testified. Friends described Sarah as loyal, devoted, even self-sacrificing. Neighbors said the couple always seemed perfect. But the evidence of Robert's secret life was undeniable. Emails, photos, hidden accounts, they revealed a man who had lived a double existence, deceiving his wife for decades. Psychologists were called to the stand. One described Sarah as suffering from complex trauma, explaining how long-term rejection and deceit can corrode mental health until the smallest trigger sparks an uncontrollable explosion. Another argued she had endured emotional starvation, living beside a man who withheld affection yet demanded loyalty. The courtroom listened as recordings of Sarah's 911 call played, calm, almost detached, her voice steady as she confessed. To some, it sounded chilling. To others, it reflected a woman who had already lost everything by the time she picked up the phone. The verdict: after 2 weeks of testimony, the jury returned with its decision: guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. They acknowledged the crime was born not of premeditation, but of rage and despair. Sarah Mitchell was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. As she was led away in handcuffs, Sarah turned to the gallery where her sister sat weeping. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. "Not for Robert, but for everything else, for the life lost, the years wasted, the shame that would follow her name forever." Aftermath. In prison, Sarah kept to herself. She attended therapy, joined group sessions, and began journaling. For the first time, she admitted she had ignored red flags out of fear of being alone, of starting over, of admitting her life wasn't perfect. She wrote, "I loved an illusion, and when it shattered, so did I." By the time she was released on parole in 2031, Sarah was a different woman. Hardened, older, but also freer. For the first time, she no longer defined herself as someone's wife. She left prison with nothing but a box of belongings, no home to return to, no partner to lean on. But she carried with her a single truth: sometimes the deepest betrayals don't just end marriages, they destroy lives. Closing reflection: the story of Sarah and Robert Mitchell asks us to look beyond the headlines. On the surface, it's about a woman who killed her husband. But beneath that lies a darker lesson: how much damage can be done when love becomes a mask, when honesty is buried, and when a relationship is built on lies instead of truth. Would Sarah have walked away had she uncovered Robert's secret sooner? Could therapy, honesty, or courage have prevented the bloodshed? Or was the slow erosion of her spirit inevitable, leading her down a path she could never escape? What we know is this: deception has consequences. Some destroy trust. Some destroy families. And in rare, tragic cases, like that night in Orlando, they destroy lives. This has been Silent Witness, Echoes of Crime.